Hello, thank you for joining me today for another on-demand training video. If you're a Windows 7 user, this session is for you. As you likely know, Windows 7 is being sunset within the next 2 years. That means Microsoft's support for Windows 7 will end, and over time the usability and security of your PC will degrade. In this video, we'll talk about what sunsetting means and what your options and next steps should be. Here's what I'll be covering. We'll start with a history of Windows 7. Then we'll go into what happens at sunset, what are my options for a new operating system, what do I need to do before upgrading and migrating, and then we'll look at some other resources. Sound good? Let's get started. A history of Windows 7. Windows 7 made its debut nearly 10 years ago on October 22, 2009. Windows 7 was originally planned as an incremental upgrade to the operating system. It was intended to address the poor critical reception of Windows Vista, while maintaining hardware and software compatibility. Windows 7 continued improvements on Windows Aero, the user interface introduced in Windows Vista, with the addition of a redesigned taskbar that allows applications to be pinned to it, and a new Windows management feature. In contrast to Windows Vista, Windows 7 was genuinely praised by critics, who considered the operating system to be a major improvement over its predecessor due to its increased performance, its more intuitive interface, with particular praise devoted to that new taskbar I mentioned. It also had fewer user account control pop-ups, and there were other improvements made across the platform. In its first 6 months, more than 100 million copies were sold worldwide. 16 months later, in early 2011, when Service Pack 1 was released, sales were still booming. So much so that by mid-2012, there were more than 630 million licenses sold. A year later, in 2013, a platform update was released. Then, in late 2014, Microsoft began preparing for Windows 7's end of life by stopping retail sales of the operating system. Several months later, in January 2015, mainstream support for Windows 7 ended. Then, all manufacturers stopped shipping new PCs with Windows 7 pre-installed in 2016. And Microsoft shortly thereafter announced that extended support will end on January 14, 2020, thus sunsetting Windows 7 for good. Windows 7 was the most popular Windows variant up until 2018, January of this year, when Windows 10 edged it out globally. Windows 7 remains popular in many countries, particularly on the continents of Asia and Africa. With extended support for the operating system ending in less than 2 years, now is the time to prepare for migrating your next operating system. So what happens at sunset? As I've mentioned, January 14th, 2020 is when Microsoft ends its extended support of Windows 7. That means no more bug fixes or security updates at all. The operating system and all your apps will generally continue to work fine, and I say generally because over time, the usability of Windows 7 will degrade. Let's look more specifically at what we'll call loss of usability. Loss of usability means applications may longer receive updates. That means your non-Microsoft applications will get update notifications that may not apply to the Windows 7 version. Features or software may become incompatible, meaning that clients and or customers may have upgraded their programs and want to use an application or share information in a way that is not available on your Windows 7 environment. Utilities may become unsupported. Similar to applications, common utilities may become incompatible with your system, and new devices may not connect. Windows 7 may not recognize a device you connect because it uses updated software to assist with connectivity. Now, let's look specifically at increased vulnerability. More significant than loss of usability, vulnerabilities to the operating system because of pre-existing or newly developed exploits will no longer be patched. In other words, software bug fixes may no longer be issued, meaning the chances that your PC could be affected by malware or other exploits that could damage your files or render your PC unusable go up over time. Antivirus programs no longer available or updated. Again, making your system vulnerable to the latest viruses and malware. And online banking transaction systems may expire, meaning software or your bank's method of authenticating or encrypting information could change and not be available to your current Windows 7 software or the environment in general. More significantly, your private information and data could become vulnerable to theft. Even third-party virus protection applications will eventually end support for Windows 7. Beyond these two possible inconveniences or dangers, loss of use and increased vulnerability, another reason to upgrade is simply to gain access to features that are available in more recent editions of Windows or in other operating systems. So, now that I've convinced you to update your operating system before the sunset date, what are your options for a new operating system? Well, there are basically two. Windows 10, which is a fairly straightforward upgrade path, and what I recommend for most small businesses and sole proprietorships who rely on business software, Microsoft Office and QuickBooks and Salesforce, to name a few, and macOS, which would mean starting fresh with an all-new working environment and all-new software, even for such software as Microsoft Office. I'd really only recommend going the Mac route if you're involved in design and or video production. Even then, you'd want to do a cost analysis. Macs are more expensive but tend to be more reliable. That is, less expensive to maintain. Okay? Let's look now at what to do once you've decided where you are going with your update, or to help you finalize that decision. So here's what you need to do before migrating. To make sure you and your hardware are ready for the next software environment, whether it be Windows 10 or Mac OS or another operating system, you'll want to do a series of inventories. In other words, you'll need to make some lists. The first, software inventory. You want to go through your Start menu, Programs folder, and any other locations on your PC and make note of all the applications and utilities you have. I suggest categorizing them into groups. 3 groups: required, optional, and unwanted. Then check your required software version numbers against the current version number in the marketplace and see if you need an upgrade. And if so, make note of the cost, if any, of doing so. Next is your software wish list. Now, from the optionals list you made, decide which you need, how soon, and do similar upgrade and cost research to see if it makes sense to add these wish list software programs. Last, hardware requirements. You want to find out if the requirements for your next OS are met by your current hardware. In particular, the required hard drive or solid state drive space, the physical space that your machine stores information on, the memory or RAM requirements, and any CPU or processor needs. And you want to check those carefully. In most cases, it's likely that you'll want to upgrade your machine, in which case it may make sense to simply buy a new machine with Windows 10 installed and then reinstall any current software that you're keeping from your Windows 7 machine. That's a more in-depth conversation we're not going to go into here, but my point is, if your machine is 7 or 8 years old, it's still running Windows 7, it may make the most sense to just go with a new PC, a new Mac, and a new operating system. So, going back to assuming we're going the Windows 10 route, there are some additional resources available to you, and I highly recommend them. So when you're ready to upgrade to Windows 10, Microsoft has 2 websites you're going to want to spend some time with. The first is their sales site, and it will give you an overview of the major features of the latest operating system. The other useful site is from Microsoft Support, and it's the Windows 10 Upgrade FAQ website. You're going to definitely want to spend some time reviewing the questions and answers here. Speaking of questions, it's likely that you have some questions particular to your situation. So, to help you, we've set up a dedicated email box. Send your questions to this email address, questions@windows7endoflife.website. Click pause on this video right now and take a moment to jot that down. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much for joining me today. Remember that you can find other on-demand training seminars like this one, as well as our quick tips videos on YouTube. And I'll be back next month with another on-demand session. Bye-bye.